Graceland wasn't just a house, it was a kingdom, and Elvis Presley was its undisputed ruler. But even kings, especially ones with an insatiable need for entertainment, could get a little restless. It was a sweltering Memphis afternoon, the kind where the air hung thick and heavy like a velvet curtain, and Elvis was sprawled on his living room couch, picking idly at a guitar string. "Man, there's just nothing on," he mumbled to Joe Esposito, who was flipping through channels on the television. A futile endeavor in the pre-cable era. Joe, one of Elvis's closest friends and trusted inner circle, just grunted. He was used to Elvis's particular brand of ennui. "Maybe we should go ride the horses, E," Joe suggested, but Elvis just shook his head, a frown creasing his handsome brow. "Nah, too hot. Besides, I'm looking for something new, something with a little pizzazz." His eyes drifted around the grand room past the gold records gleaming on the walls, the framed movie posters, the collection of curiosities he'd amassed. He had a zoo out back filled with peacocks and dogs and donkeys. He had cars, guitars, jumpsuits galore. What could possibly add more sparkle to the king's life? Suddenly, a thought sparked in his mind. Bright as a stage light. "A parrot," he exclaimed, sitting bolt upright. Joe paused. "Remote in hand? A parrot? You mean like a bird?" "Not just any bird," Joe Elvis said, his eyes alight with newfound purpose. "Bird that talks, imagine it. A little feathered friend sitting on my shoulder, chatting away." Joe looked skeptical. "What would you teach it to say?" Elvis grinned, a slow, confident smile that always promised mischief. "Oh, I got just the phrase, the greatest phrase in the world. In fact, one that'll make everyone in Graceland stop and listen." And so the very next day, a large ornate cage arrived at Graceland, delivered by a nervous man from a local exotic pet store. Inside, perched on a wooden swing, was a magnificent creature. It was a hyacinth macaw, its feathers a brilliant, almost impossibly deep blue. Its eyes, bright and intelligent, framed by striking yellow rings. It looked regal, ancient, and undeniably a little bit sassy. "Well, hello there, little fella," Elvis crooned, approaching the cage with the gentleness he reserved for his animals, his baby daughter, Lisa Marie, and the occasional rare guitar. "What's your name, boy?" The parrot tilted its head, observing him with an unnervingly human gaze that let out a sharp, almost defiant squawk. "He doesn't have a name yet, Mr. Presley," the pet store owner stammered. "He's a very intelligent bird, though. Learns fast." Elvis's smile widened. "Intelligent? Huh? Perfect. I think I'll call him King Tut." "Yeah, King Tut. Suits you, don't it?" King Tut ruffled his magnificent blue feathers, then let out another, softer squawk. It sounded almost like an agreement. The cage was placed in a prominent spot in the living room near the grand piano, where Elvis often held court. It was a place where King Tut would be exposed to all the goings-on, all the visitors, all the life of Graceland. Elvis wasted no time. As soon as the pet store man had left, he pulled up a chair close to King Tut's cage. "All right, Tut," he began, speaking slowly and clearly, exaggerating each word. "Listen real good now. This is important. This is the phrase that's going to make you famous, just like your old man." King Tut blinked, his head cocked to the side. "The king is back," Elvis enunciated each word, drawing them out, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "Can you say that? Tut, the king is back." Parrot remained silent, occasionally preening a feather with its powerful beak. Elvis tried again, his voice rising slightly in enthusiasm. "Come on, Tut, say it with me, the king is back." King Tut shifted on his perch, then let out a loud, ear-splitting shriek that made Elvis jump. It sounded less like a word and more like a rusty hinge. Elvis chuckled, unfazed. "Feisty one, ain't ya? That's all right. We got time. We got all the time in the world." For the rest of the afternoon, Elvis dedicated himself to his new feathered pupil. He repeated the phrase over and over, sometimes softly, sometimes with the booming resonance of his stage voice. He'd bring King Tut treats, slivers of apple, special bird seed, hoping to coax the words out. Priscilla, elegantly dressed even at home, walked into the living room, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Having fun with your new friend, darling?" Elvis turned, his eyes sparkling with a childlike delight. "He's going to be a genius, Prissy. He's going to be the smartest bird in the whole world. And he's going to say the best thing you ever heard." Priscilla glanced at King Tut, who was now intently watching Elvis with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. "And what might that be?" she asked, her tone amused. Elvis leaned inconspiratively, though King Tut was the only other one listening. "He's gonna say, 'The king is back.'" He whispered the last part, then straightened up, a proud glint in his eye. "Imagine that, Prissy, my own personal announcer." Priscilla smiled, a little wary perhaps, but mostly just happy to see Elvis so engaged. "Well, that certainly would be something," she said before heading off to check on Lisa Marie. Elvis turned back to King Tut, who was still silently observing him. "You heard the lady? Tut, you gotta impress her. Now let's try it again. Nice and clear. The king is back." King Tut blinked. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stretched behind his head with a claw and let out a soft, almost imperceptible whistle. It wasn't "The king is back." It wasn't even a squawk. It was just a whistle. Elvis sighed, but his determination remained. "All right, Tut, day one. We'll get there. Tomorrow we start serious training. You're going to make me proud, little king." He had no idea just how much chaos this simple ambition would unleash within the hallowed halls of Graceland. He just wanted a talking parrot. He was about to get much, much more. The days that followed were filled with a peculiar new rhythm at Graceland. Elvis, usually flitting from one passion to another, now had a singular focus: King Tut's elocution lessons. Mornings began with Elvis bringing a cup of coffee to the living room, settling into a chair beside the elaborate cage, and beginning his Dakid tone over and over. "Say it, Tut. The king is back." King Tut, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention even if he wasn't quite grasping the concept of human speech. He'd bob his head, preen his iridescent feathers, and sometimes, just to annoy Elvis, mimic a sound he'd heard earlier. Once he perfectly pretimicate the clang of a spoon against a ceramic mug, startling Joe Esposito. Another time he let out a surprisingly accurate rendition of Elvis's own hearty laugh, causing Elvis to stop mid-sentence and stare. "He's a mimic all right," Elvis said, shaking his head. "Just not mimicking me yet. Not the important stuff anyway." Priscilla would often walk in to find Elvis talking intently to the bird, almost like a father trying to teach his child its first words. She'd smile sometimes, offering a piece of fruit to King Tut, who would delicately take it from her fingers with his powerful beak. "You're very patient with him, darling," she'd remark. "Gotta be," Elvis would reply. "This bird's got potential. He's just playing hard to get, that's all." The Memphis Mafia, the ever-present entourage, found Elvis's new hobby highly amusing. They'd gather in the living room sipping sodas and offer unsolicited advice. Red West would suggest, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Nah, Red, that ain't the way," Elvis would counter. "You gotta coax 'em. Make 'em feel loved. Make 'em want to talk." Marty Lacker, ever the realist, chimed in. "He's a parrot, Elvis. They just pick up whatever they hear. Maybe you need to play it on a tape recorder all day." Elvis actually considered that. He even had a tape, made his voice clearly repeating, "The king is back. The king is back." He'd play it on a loop for hours when he was out of the room, hoping King Tut would absorb it through osmosis. The rest of Graceland, however, started to get a little tired of the endlessly repeating phrase echoing through the house. One afternoon, as Elvis was out at the movie theater he'd had built, a new maid, Martha, was dusting in the living room. Tape recorder was playing softly in the background. "The king is back. The king is back." suddenly from the cage a squawk. Martha jumped, nearly dropping her duster. "Oh, you scared me, little fella." King Tut shifted on his perch. Then, in a voice that was clearly not Elvis's but eerily human, he squawked, Kang B. Back." It was garbled, disjointed, but Martha's jaw dropped. "Did you just say something?" she whispered, staring at the bird. King Tut puffed up his chest, then let out a delighted-sounding whistle. Martha hurried to tell the other staff, whispering excitedly about the talking bird. Soon the news reached Joe Esposito. He said, "King back?" Joe asked, genuinely surprised. When Elvis returned, buzzing from a triple feature, Joe wasted no time. "You're not going to believe it." King Tut said something. Martha heard him. He said, "King back." Elvis's eyes lit up. He practically sprinted to the living room. "Tut, did you really, boy? Did you say King back?" King Tut just eyed him, then let out a series of clicks and whistles. Elvis spent the next hour trying to make him repeat it, but King Tut remained stubbornly silent on that particular phrase. He did, however, produce a surprisingly good imitation of Elvis's frustrated sigh. "He's doing it on purpose, I swear." Elvis grumbled, though a smile played on his lips. "He's just teasing me." Despite the teasing, progress, however small, was being made. The disjointed pingback was a sign. The staff started to notice more. A delivery man swore he heard a faint king as he dropped off a package. A gardener, trimming the rose bushes near the living room window, reported hearing a series of clicks followed by a clear, albeit whispered, "is back." The whispers of King and back became a running joke among the Graceland staff. They'd playfully ask each other, "Is the king back yet?" Whenever Elvis stepped out for a moment, they'd eye King Tut, wondering when he would unleash the full phrase. One evening, Elvis was sitting quietly, strumming his guitar. Lost in thought, the tape recorder had been turned off. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning filled the room. King Tut was nestled on his perch, seeming a Siben. "King back." Elvis's fingers stilled on the guitar strings. "King back," his heart doing a little flip. "Did you hear that, boy?" he whispered, as if speaking too loudly would scare the words away. King Tut didn't respond. Elvis waited, hardly breathing. Then, moments later, a slightly stronger, almost triumphant sound emerged from the cage. "The king back." It wasn't perfect. The "is" was missing, and the words were still slightly separate. But it was closer. Much, much closer. Elvis felt a surge of pride, like a father whose child had just taken their first shaky steps. "That's it, Tut. That's it, boy," he exclaimed, jumping up and rushing to the cage. "You're getting there." "Oh, you are absolutely getting there." King Tut, perhaps sensing Elvis's excitement, puffed himself up and let out a triumphant squawk. It wasn't the phrase, but it was certainly a sound of self-satisfaction. Elvis knew it wouldn't be long now. The whispers were turning into clearer echoes. Soon, very soon, the full declaration would burst forth, and his little feathered herald would announce his reign to all of Graceland. He imagined the looks on people's faces, the surprised delight. It would be magnificent. Little did he know, magnificent was just one word for the chaos that was about to unfold. The day it happened began like any other at Graceland. The sun climbed high, baking the Memphis asphalt. Elvis was downstairs in the pool room setting up a game of billiards with Red and Sunny West. Priscilla was overseeing Lisa Marie's playtime in the nursery. The kitchen hummed with activity, preparing for lunch. King Tut was in his usual spot in the living room, occasionally letting out a random whistle or a particularly grating squawk that made anyone nearby flinch. The tape recorder, with Elvis's voice repeating "the king is back," had been playing almost constantly for days, a monotonous background soundtrack to life in the mansion. Most of the staff had learned to tune it out, a low hum of sound they barely registered. Elvis had almost given up on direct lessons, figuring King Tut would learn it by sheer exposure. He still checked on the bird, offering treats and an encouraging word. But the intense one-on-one sessions had dwindled downstairs. Elvis lined up a shot. "All right, Red, watch this," he drawled. Leaning over the green felt table, he squinted, aiming for the corner pocket. At that precise moment, a sudden silence fell over the living room. The tape recorder, for reasons unknown, had finally given up the ghost. It sputtered, whirred, and then clicked off. The sudden absence of Elvis's looped voice was jarring. In the quiet, King Tut, perhaps startled by the abrupt cessation of sound, shifted on his perch. He looked around, his bright eyes taking in the suddenly still room, tilted his head, listening to the new subtle sounds of the house, the distant clatter from the kitchen, the muffled laughter from the nursery. Then he opened his beak, and in a voice that was unmistakably human, startlingly clear, and with an inflection that was uncannily similar to Elvis Presley's own famous baritone, King Tut boomed, "The King Eyes back." The words resonated through the grand living room, echoing off the high ceilings and polished floors. They were loud, confident, and perfectly articulated. Upstairs, Priscilla, who had just stepped out of Lisa Marie's nursery, froze her hand, poised to close the door, stopped. She distinctly heard it. "The king is back." But Elvis was downstairs playing pool. She knew that. Had he come up quietly? No, his voice sounded amplified. In the kitchen, the cook, Miss Annie, nearly dropped a bowl of potato salad. She looked at the maid beside her, Martha, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that, dear? Sounded just like Mr. Presley, but he's out in the pool room." Martha, who had been the first to hear King Tut's partial attempts, gasped. "It's the bird," he finally said it. Down in the pool room, Elvis had just sunk his shot. "Boom! See that, boys?" he crowed. And then from upstairs, clear as a bell, came the voice again. "The King, eyes back." Elvis, Red, and Sonny all stopped dead. They exchanged bewildered glances. "Did you hear that, E?" Sonny asked, his eyes wide. "Sounded just like you." Elvis frowned. "Yeah, I heard it, but I'm right here. Was that Joe messin' with us?" They looked at Joe, who had just walked in from the garage. Joe threw his hands up. "Wasn't me." "What was that?" Another voice, closer this time, sounded from the doorway leading to the main house. "Mr. Presley, you're not going to believe it." It was Martha, her face flushed with excitement and a touch of disbelief. "It's King Tut," he said it. "The whole thing." Elvis's jaw dropped. He pushed past Red and Sonny, taking the stairs. Two at a time, his heart thumping with anticipation, he burst into the living room, half expecting some trick. King Tut sat on his perch, looking serenely pleased with himself. He preened a feather, then looked directly at Elvis. "The king is back," he repeated with an unmistakable flourish, almost as if he was bowing. Elvis stared, triumphant grin spread across his face. He did it. He really did it. He clapped his hands together, pure joy radiating from him. Priscilla appeared in the doorway, a mixture of amusement and mild alarm on her face. "He certainly did, darling. I thought you'd somehow teleported upstairs." The other staff members, drawn by the commotion, began to gather. They whispered, pointed, and stared at King Tut with awe. King Tut, clearly relishing his moment in the spotlight, puffed up his chest. He swiveled his head, taking in his adoring audience. Then, as if for an encore, he let out another, even louder, "The King Eyes back." This time the phrase was accompanied by a strange, almost guttural caw that Elvis hadn't heard before. A sound of sheer power and triumph. It was less a bird call and more a declaration. He reached into the cage, offering King Tut a piece of apple, which the bird accepted with a delicate bite. "You're a star, Tut. A real star," he crooned. "This is just amazing." He envisioned the possibilities. King Tut could greet visitors, announce his presence, add a touch of royal flair to Graceland. It was brilliant. It was unique. It was him. What Elvis didn't consider, in his moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, was the sheer volume of King Tut's new vocal ability, or the fact that King Tut, having finally mastered the phrase, had no intention of keeping it to himself or the timing, or the sheer chaotic implications of a bird that could perfectly mimic the king of rock and roll. Especially when that phrase was, "The king is back." The first seed of chaos had been sown, wrapped in blue feathers and delivered with a booming voice. And Graceland, already a whirlwind of activity, was about to get a whole lot wilder. The initial reaction to King Tut's full declaration was, as Elvis had predicted, one of delighted surprise. Friends and family would stop in their tracks, jaws agape, when the booming voice of "The king is back" suddenly erupted from the living room. Elvis loved it. He'd often pretend to be out of the room just to witness the startled reactions of visitors. "See that, Joe?" he'd whisper, peeking from behind a door. "Gets 'em every time." But the novelty, like many things at Graceland, began to wear thin. King Tut, having found his voice, seemed determined to use it, and he had no internal clock, no sense of proper timing. The first hint of trouble came during a particularly important phone call. Elvis was in his office, deep in conversation with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel, never one for small talk, was discussing an upcoming movie deal, a potentially lucrative one. "Now, Elvis." Colonel Parker's gravelly voice drawled through the receiver. "This picture's got some real potential. We're talking big numbers, son, but it requires your full attention. No distractions, understand?" Just as Elvis opened his mouth to reply, a booming, perfectly clear voice echoed from the living room, carrying easily through the open doors. "The King eyes back." Colonel Parker paused on the other end of the line. "What was that, son?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Sounds like you got a whole choir over there," Elvis winced. "And no, Colonel, that's just my new parrot." A long silence. Then Colonel Parker let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Parrot, you say? Well, make sure that feathered friend of yours doesn't start giving out interviews. And keep him quiet when we're talking business." "All right." Elvis mumbled an apology and tried to shush King Tut from afar. But the bird, emboldened by his performance, merely repeated the phrase, slightly louder this time. Elvis quickly closed the office door, his face a little red. "He's just excited," Elvis explained, trying to regain his composure. The movie deal went through, but the colonel remained wary of the enthusiastic parrot. Next, it was the Graceland staff who began to feel the brunt of King Tut's newfound vocal talent. The maids, already nervous about disturbing the king during his naps, were now on high alert. If Elvis was asleep in his bedroom, and King Tut suddenly bellowed, "The King eyes back," the maids would often jump, thinking Elvis had woken up and was demanding something. They'd rush to his room only to find him still sound asleep, dreaming perhaps of peanut butter and banana sandwiches. "It's like a jump scare every time, Martha," the maid complained good-naturedly to Miss Annie in the kitchen. "My heart just about leaps out of my chest." Even Lisa Marie, usually delighted by the bright blue bird, started to get confused. She was a toddler, just learning to understand the world around her. She knew her daddy was the king. So when King Tut announced, "The King eyes back," while Elvis was clearly already there, playing with her in the nursery, she'd stare, puzzled, at the bird, then at her father. "Daddy already here," she'd say, pointing a chubby finger at Elvis, then at the parrot as if trying to correct the bird. Elvis would laugh, trying to explain. "He's just pretending, sweet bee. He's just a funny bird." But even he could see the slight confusion in her innocent eyes. One particularly embarrassing incident occurred during a visit from a prominent music executive. Elvis was trying to impress him with Graceland's opulence and relaxed atmosphere. They were enjoying a quiet conversation in the living room discussing Elvis's next album. "We're looking for something with a bit more edge, Elvis," the executive was saying thoughtfully. "Something that reminds people of the raw power you have." Just then, King Tut, who had been silent for an unusually long time, let loose with a thunderous "The King eyes back." It wasn't just spoken. It was belted out, almost like an operatic flourish. The executive jumped, spilling a little of his iced tea. He looked around wildly. Then his eyes landed on the innocent-looking bluebird. He blinked. "Good heavens, that bird sounds exactly like you, Mr. Presley. Gave me quite a fright." Elvis chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, he's a character, that Tut." The executive forced a smile, but the flow of conversation was broken. Every few minutes after that, King Tut would interject seemingly at random with his signature phrase. By the end of the meeting, the executive seemed more impressed by the parrot's vocal range than by any musical ideas. He left with a slight twitch in his eye. "He's getting a bit loud," Priscilla observed gently that evening after the executive had departed. She was filing her nails, but her eyes kept darting towards the bird cage. Elvis, who had been so proud, felt a tiny prickle of annoyance for the first time. "He's just excited, Prissy. He's finally got it down perfect." "Perfect, yes," Priscilla conceded. "But perhaps he could be a little less perfect at 3 o'clock in the morning?" Elvis frowned. King Tut had indeed started his booming announcements at all hours, waking staff and even on occasion startling Elvis himself out of a deep sleep. "He just likes to announce the start of the day," Elvis grumbled, though he knew she had a point. The joy of having a talking parrot was slowly giving way to the reality of having a very loud, very persistent, and very ill-timed feathered alarm clock. Chaos wasn't just charming anymore. It was beginning to disrupt the carefully computed peace of Graceland, and it was only just beginning. The initial amusement surrounding King Tut's pronouncements quickly morphed into a unique brand of Graceland-specific chaos. It wasn't just inconvenient. It started to cause genuine confusion, both inside and outside the mansion walls. One afternoon, a group of particularly fervent fans had gathered at the gates of Graceland hoping for a glimpse of their idol. Elvis, feeling generous, decided to make a rare appearance at the front gate to wave. He strolled out, gave them a beaming smile and a peace sign, then went back inside. No sooner had he re-entered the house than King Tut, from his prime vantage point in the living room, let out a resounding "The King Eyes Back." The fans who had just seen Elvis leave the gates suddenly heard his voice announcing his return. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. "He's back already?" someone whispered. "Did he sneak out somewhere else?" For the next half hour, confused fans kept pressing closer to the gates, peering through the fence, trying to spot Elvis again. The guards used to the routine of fans leaving after Elvis's appearance were baffled. They explained that Elvis had gone back inside, but then King Tut would chime in again, "The King Eyes Back," fueling the speculation. The guards eventually had to send everyone away, promising Elvis was resting. "He's making my job harder." One of the security guards, a burly man named Mike, complained to Joe Esposito later. "They think he's playing hide-and-seek with them." Inside, the misinterpretations were equally problematic. One morning, Elvis decided he needed to clear his head. He slipped out of Graceland through a side door, unnoticed by most, for a quiet drive in the countryside. He told no one, wanting true solitude. Minutes after he was gone, Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, walked into the living room. He glanced at the empty space where Elvis usually was, then heard the familiar booming announcement from the cage, "The King Eyes Back." "Oh good, Elvis is back already," Vernon muttered, assuming his son had just returned from somewhere in the house. He went about his business, not realizing Elvis was miles, enjoying the open road. Later that day, Elvis said, confused, "I just went out for a little bit, but I heard you come back in," Vernon insisted. "Your bird said, 'The king is back,'" Elvis groaned. "Oh no, Daddy. That was just King Tut. He says that all the time." Vernon blinked, so he wasn't really back. He shook his head. "That bird's gonna confuse the pants off everyone." Kitchen staff, particularly Miss Annie, started making a game of it. Every time King Tut announced "The King Eyes Back," they'd glance at each other. If Elvis was actually in the house, they'd roll their eyes. If he was out, they'd sigh. Sometimes they'd try to guess where Elvis was based on the parrot's declaration. It became a peculiar form of internal radar. But the real disruption came when Elvis started having recording sessions at his home studio, which was adjacent to the main house. The studio was soundproofed, but not perfectly. During a particularly delicate vocal take for a new ballad, Elvis was pouring his heart into a tender lyric. Control room was silent, the engineers holding their breath. Suddenly, a faint but discernible "The King is back" could be heard bleeding through the studio walls right in the middle of a quiet moment in the song. The engineers flinched. Elvis stopped. Frustrated. "Sounds like the bird E," one of the engineers said apologetically. "Must be coming through the vents." They tried again, another take, another heart vocal, and again right on cue. "The King is back," Avlitz exclaimed, throwing his hands up. It's like he knows exactly when to interrupt. The recording session became a battle against King Tut's untimely pronouncement. They tried turning up the studio soundproofing, playing music loudly in the living room to distract him, even gently placing a blanket over his cage during takes, which only made him squawk louder in protest. The result was several ruined takes, and a very annoyed Elvis. The romance of the talking parrot was rapidly fading, replaced by a growing sense of exasperation. Priscilla tried to be the voice of reason. "Darling, he's just a bird. He doesn't understand context. He just repeats what he's learned. But he repeats it like he's trying to run the place," Elvis complained, pacing his living room. "He's gonna make people think I'm crazy, talking to myself, or something, or worse, that I'm just appearing and disappearing like some kind of ghost." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare moment of genuine stress showing on his face. The initial charm of King Tut had vanished. The parrot had become a feathered tyrant, his single booming phrase the bane of Elvis's existence. He had wanted to create an announcement. He had created a public nuisance. And the chaos was about to get even more personal. The King is back pronouncements began to wear on everyone's nerves. What was once amusing was now just plain annoying and at times truly disruptive. The daily rhythm of Graceland, usually a smooth blend of organized chaos, was now a constant cacophony, punctuated by the parrot's booming voice. One evening, Elvis decided to host a casual dinner for some close friends and a couple of movie producers he was trying to impress. The atmosphere was relaxed, the food was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Elvis was in his element, charming everyone with stories and jokes. Suddenly, as a producer was mid-sentence talking about a potential new role for Elvis, King Tut let out his signature line, "The King is back." The producer paused, looking around, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Did someone just shout?" Elvis chuckled, forcing a smile. "Oh, that's just King Tut, my parrot. He's a real character." "He certainly is," the producer said, clearly unnerved. "Sounds remarkably like you, Mr. Presley. Almost gave me whiplash, thinking you'd popped into existence from thin air." For the rest of the evening, every time King Tut spoke, the conversation would halt. It was impossible to have a continuous thought. Producers seemed less interested in movie deals, and more fascinated and slightly annoyed by the vocal avian. By dessert, they were openly stifling yawns. The dinner, meant to be a relaxed networking opportunity, turned into an unintended showcase of King Tut's vocal prowess. After they left, Priscilla gently approached Elvis. "Darling, I think we need to do something about King Tut." Elvis sighed, running a hand through his pompadour. "He's more than a big much," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. "He's disrupting everything. The staff are getting jumpy. Lisa Marie is confused, and you can barely have a coherent conversation without him announcing your presence, whether you're here or not." Elvis slumped onto the couch. "But I taught him that. It was my idea. How can I just unteach him?" "We don't have to unteach him. Maybe move his cage. Put him somewhere where he won't be in the middle of everything," Priscilla suggested, looking at the large ornate cage that was now a monument to noisy frustration. The next morning, Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was dealing with a frantic phone call from a local newspaper reporter. The reporter had received multiple calls from confused fans at the Graceland gates, claiming they heard Elvis's voice announcing his return multiple times that morning, even though he hadn't made an appearance. "Mr. Presley, is Elvis playing some kind of prank?" the reporter asked, skepticism clear in his voice. "We're getting reports of him popping up and disappearing, and fans are getting agitated." Vernon, trying to be diplomatic, explained about the parrot. "It's just a bird, son. My boy taught him to say, 'The king is back.' He just says it whenever he pleases." The reporter burst out laughing. "Talking parrot? That sounds like quite a story. Can I send a photographer?" Vernon, ever protective of Elvis's image, quickly refused. The last thing they needed was a newspaper headline about Elvis Presley and his confusing, loud-mouthed parrot. But the damage was done. Whispers of Elvis's crazy bird began to circulate in Memphis. The personal impact on Elvis was profound. He had loved the idea of his personal herald. Now he felt ridiculous. He found himself flinching every time King Tut started his announcement. Couldn't even enjoy watching TV in the living room without the bird's sudden outburst. One particularly frustrating afternoon, Elvis was trying to rehearse a new song, strumming his guitar softly in the living room. Trying to find the melody, he was deep in concentration, trying to capture a fragile emotion. From his cage, King Tut, seemingly sensing Elvis's vulnerability, let out a particularly ear-splitting "T-H-E King Eyes back," followed by a strange cackling sound that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Elvis slammed his guitar down hard. "That's it?" he bellowed, startling King Tut, who ruffled his feathers nervously. "That's just it!" He marched over to the cage, his face a thundercloud. "You know what you're doing, don't you, you little blue menace? You're trying to drive me crazy. You're trying to take over my own house." King Tut just stared back, unblinking, then tilted his head and let out a soft, almost taunting "back." Elvis sighed, running a hand over his face. He knew he couldn't stay mad at an animal, especially one he had personally taught to be so disruptive, but the frustration was immense. The beautiful, brilliant bluebird had become a symbol of a good idea, gone terribly, chaotically wrong. The king of Graceland was losing his grip, not on his throne, but on his peace and quiet. The once heartwarming idea of a talking parrot had become a feathered fiasco, and Elvis knew deep down something had to change. But what do you do with a bird that perfectly proclaims your return, even when you haven't left? The chaos had reached a breaking point. Graceland, once a sanctuary, felt more like a circus tent under the constant booming announcements of King Tut. The solution, everyone agreed, had to come quickly. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's inner circle, held an impromptu meeting in the pool room. Away from the feathered eavesdropper, Joe Esposito, always the organizer, took charge. "All right, boys," Joe said, chalking his cue stick. "We got a King Tut problem. Elvis is about to tear his hair out. We need a plan." "We could just put a blanket over his cage permanently," Red West suggested, grim-faced. "Might calm him down." "He screams even louder when you do that." "Some Kizama Maya." Tom. Finally, Priscilla walked in, having overheard snippets of their brainstorming. "He's a parrot, not a radio," she stated calmly. "You can't just unteach him a phrase he's mastered. But we can change his environment." All eyes turned to her. "We need to move the cage," Priscilla continued. "Somewhere away from the main living area. Somewhere where his pronouncements won't cause so much disruption." Elvis, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. He looked tired, his usual sparkle dimmed by the ongoing parrot problem. "Move him, but he's so beautiful right there in the living room. He's part of the decor." "He's a beautiful, chaotic part of the decor, darling," Priscilla said gently. "Think of it this way. He'll still be in the house, still your pet, but he'll be in a place where he can announce your return to his heart's content without confusing the staff or scaring away movie executives." Elvis sighed. He knew she was right. His vanity had chosen the prominent living room spot, but his sanity was begging for peace. "All right," he conceded, rubbing his temples. "Where would we put him?" They debated various locations: the sunroom, a quiet corner of the dining room, even Elvis's private office, quickly dismissed due to potential phone call interference. Finally, Joe suggested the large, airy landing at the top of the main staircase. It was still central enough to be part of the house, but far enough removed from critical areas like the living room, kitchen, and the front door. And he'd still feel like he's part of things, without being all of things. Elvis looked hesitant for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Moving King Tut's enormous cage was a team effort. It required 4 men and a lot of grunting and careful maneuvering up the grand staircase. King Tut, perhaps sensing a change, squawked indignantly throughout the process. "The King I's back," he shrieked, as they hoisted him up the stairs, almost as if protesting his relocation. "No, Tut, the king is leaving this room," Red muttered under his breath. Once the cage was settled in its new spot on the landing, near a large window, Elvis approached it cautiously. "Well, Tut," he said, "this is your new spot. It's nice, huh? Plenty of room to stretch your wings." King Tut eyed him suspiciously, then puffed up his feathers. He remained silent for a long moment, making everyone wonder if the move had finally shocked him into quietude. Then he let out a resounding "The King Is back." The sound echoed impressively in the high-ceiling stairwell, but it was less jarring, more contained. It resonated rather than overwhelmed. A collective sigh of relief went through the assembled group. It was loud, yes, but it wasn't in their faces anymore. Over the next few days, the difference was remarkable. While King Tut still loudly proclaimed Elvis's return at random intervals, the announcements no longer caused mass confusion or interrupted important meetings. They were just part of the ambient sound of Graceland. If you were in the living room, you could hear it, but it was distant, almost charming. Again, Elvis found himself breathing easier. He could watch TV in peace. He could have a conversation without sudden interruption. He could even take a nap without being startled awake by his own supposed arrival. He still visited King Tut, daily offering treats and talking to him. The parrot, no longer the sole source of chaos, seemed to settle into his new, slightly less central role. He would still say the king is back, but now Elvis found himself smiling at it again. One afternoon, Elvis was walking down the grand staircase just as King Tut let out his signature phrase, "The King Is back." Elvis paused, looking at the bird. "You know what, Tut," he said, a genuine, fond smile spreading across his face. "You're right, I am back, and you're still the only bird in the world who can announce it this good." King Tut cocked his head, then gave a soft, almost contented squawk. The immediate crisis was over. Chaotic echoes were now just part of the Graceland experience. But the parrot's strange declaration had inadvertently set the stage for something deeper. Something that would remind Elvis of what "the king is back" truly meant beyond just fame and showmanship. The heart of the story was just beginning to emerge from the feathers and the noise. With King Tut's cage relocated, Graceland slowly regained a semblance of its former peaceful, albeit lively atmosphere. The booming "The King Is back" still rang out occasionally, but it was more of an amusing quirk, now a part of the house's unique charm, rather than a source of constant irritation. Elvis, now able to relax in his own home, found himself visiting King Tut more often, not for training, but just to talk to him. He'd stand by the cage on the landing, offering a piece of fruit or a gentle scratch to the bird's head, and King Tut would often respond with a soft whistle or a familiar squawk. One quiet afternoon, Elvis was sitting on the stairs just below King Tut's cage, strumming his guitar. He was playing a gospel tune, something soulful and introspective. King Tut, perched on his swing, listened intently, his head tilted suddenly. Elvis paused, his strumming deep in thought. He looked at King Tut. "You know, Tut," he murmured, That phrase you say, "the king is back." Everyone thinks it's just about me being famous, don't they? About show business. King Tut blinked, then let out a soft, "Back." "Yeah, back," Elvis repeated, a faraway look in his eyes. "But it means more than that, doesn't it? It ain't just about being on stage or in a movie. It's about coming home, too. Coming back to what truly matters." Thought of Priscilla, of Lisa, Marie of his father, Vernon and the loyal friends who made Graceland a home, not just a mansion. He thought about the peace he felt when he was just himself away from the spotlights. Just then, Lisa Marie, a tiny whirlwind in a frilly dress, toddled up the stairs, followed closely by Priscilla. "Daddy!" Lisa Marie squealed, reaching for him. Elvis immediately put his guitar down and scooped her up, a wide smile lighting his face. "Hey there, sweet pea. What's my little princess doing up here?" As he held Lisa Marie close, King Tut from his cage above chose that moment to announce in his clearest, most resonant voice, "The King I's back." This time the phrase didn't cause a flinch or a sigh of annoyance. Instead, Elvis looked at King Tut, then at Priscilla, and a genuine, heartwarming smile spread across his face. He kissed Lisa Marie's head. "He's right, ain't he, Prissy?" Elvis said, his voice soft. "Every time I come home to you two, every time I'm just here with my family, the king truly is back, back to where he belongs." Priscilla smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. She knew the pressures Elvis faced, the constant demands of fame. She knew how much he craved the normalcy and love that Graceland provided. Parrot's phrase, once a source of irritation, now seemed to encapsulate that very sentiment. "He's a very wise bird, darling," she said, reaching out to stroke Lisa Marie's hair. From that day on, Elvis's relationship with King Tut changed. He no longer saw the bird as a source of chaos, but as a peculiar, feathered reminder of what truly mattered. When King Tut announced, "The King I's back," Elvis would often pause, a thoughtful look on his face, and sometimes he'd whisper, "Yeah, Tut, I am." He began to interpret the phrase in different ways. The king is back to his music after a long break. The king is back to his spiritual journey. After a period of doubt, the king is back to his family after touring. Parrot, in its simple, repetitive way, had become an unexpected guru, prompting Elvis to reflect on his own life and values. The staff at Graceland also started to see King Tut differently. His announcements, once a source of exasperation, now elicited fond chuckles. Miss Annie in the kitchen would sometimes say, "Sounds like the king's having a good day," when she heard the bird boom. The guards at the gate would smile wryly when they heard the distant echo, knowing it was just the bird and not a sign of Elvis playing tricks on the fans. Even Vernon, initially confused, found a quiet fondness for the blue macaw. He'd sometimes lean against the railing of the staircase, watching King Tut. "That bird sure does love to talk about your son," he'd say to Elvis, a twinkle in his eye. "Guess he knows who's boss." The chaos King Tut had caused had, in a strange way, brought a new kind of clarity to Graceland. It had highlighted the value of peace and quiet, but more importantly, it had underscored the deep, unwavering love and foundation that existed within the Presley family, away from the glare of the world. The parrot, whose single phrase had caused so much disruption, had inadvertently become a symbol of Elvis's true kingdom, his home, his family, and the quiet moments of belonging that fame could never truly provide. And in a world where Elvis Presley was constantly on display, this small feathered creature offered a unique, unexpected path to self-reflection and connection. The king was indeed back, not just to Graceland, but to a deeper understanding of himself. One crisp autumn morning, a tour bus full of fans pulled up to the gates of Graceland as they did every day. These were the true devotees, the ones who came from all over the world just to be near Elvis's home. Elvis, feeling a rare surge of openness, decided to walk the grounds, waving to the fans from a distance. As he walked past the living room window, Deep in thought about a new song, King Tut, sensing his presence, let out a particularly strong T-H-E, King I's back. A young fan, a girl named Susie, with bright, hopeful eyes, heard it clearly from behind the gates. She gasped, then turned to her friend. "Did you hear that? It sounds just like him." "It's just the bird Susie," her friend said, already used to the local legend of Elvis's talking parrot. But Susie wasn't convinced. She pressed closer to the fence, trying to catch another sound. No, this was different. It felt real. Later that day, Susie, feeling a little deflated that she hadn't seen Elvis up close, was looking at the souvenirs in the Graceland gift shop. She saw a small postcard with a picture of Elvis, and almost as if on cue, she heard a faint, distant echo. It was just a whisper, carried on the breeze from the open windows of the mansion back. Susie smiled. It wasn't a full phrase, but it was enough. She felt a connection, a secret message just for her. Meanwhile, back inside, Elvis was having a conversation with Vernon. Vernon was looking over some fan mail, shaking his head at the sheer volume of it. "They just love you so much," son Vernon said, sorting through the letters. "They never stop wanting more." Elvis nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Yeah, I know, Daddy. Sometimes it feels like a lot, like I'm just supposed to be the king all the time. On stage, off stage, 24 hours a day." Suddenly, King Tut, from his perch on the landing, boomed, "T-H-E, King I's back." Elvis looked up, not in annoyance, but in contemplation. "You know," he mused, "King Tut says the king is back. But for them, for the fans, maybe the king is back means something else entirely." Vernon raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, son?" "It ain't just about me coming back to Graceland," Elvis explained, gesturing vaguely towards the gates. "For them, when they hear that or when they see me, the king is back means hope. It means the music. It means the dream. It means that feeling they get when they hear my songs." He walked over to the grand staircase, looking up at King Tut, who was preening a feather. "He's not just saying I'm here, Daddy. He's saying the feeling is here, the spirit, the energy. That's what they're looking for." Vernon slowly nodded, understanding dawning on his face. "You might be right, son. They want to know the king. They love the king. They remember is still there. Still strong." This realization shifted something profound within Elvis. He had initially taught the parrot the phrase out of a sense of playfulness and a touch of vanity. But the chaos it caused, and now this quiet introspection had revealed a deeper truth. "King is back" wasn't just a personal announcement. It was a promise, a reassurance to millions. Later that afternoon, Elvis found himself walking out to the front gate again, something he rarely did this time. He didn't just wave. He lingered for a moment, looking at the faces in the crowd. He saw Susie still there, clutching her postcard. He saw the hopeful eyes, the smiles, the quiet adoration. He didn't say anything, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the chaos King Tut had inadvertently unleashed had forced him to look beyond himself, to understand the impact he had on others, and to appreciate the profound connection he shared with his fans. Back inside, as he passed the landing, King Tut once again announced, "T-H-E, King I's back." This time, Elvis didn't just smile. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. He looked at the bird. "Tut," he said softly, but genuine emotion in his voice. "The king is back, and he's here to stay, for all of them." He walked away from the cage, a spring in his step, heading for his music room. The accidental chaos of the talking parrot had brought him full circle, reminding him of his purpose and the true meaning of his reign. The heartwarming lesson had been learned, not through grand pronounced a phrase, of a blue macaw. Life at Graceland settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. King Tut remained on the landing, his "T-H-E, King I's back" announcements, becoming a beloved, if slightly startling, part of the house's character. He was no longer a source of chaos, but an eccentric, blue-feathered ambassador of the Presley family. Elvis, having found a deeper meaning in the parrot's phrase, now saw King Tut as more than just a pet. He was a silent, though very loud, confidant. Elvis would often pause by the cage, sharing his thoughts, sometimes even singing a few lines of a new song just for King Tut. The parrot, in turn, seemed to listen, occasionally bobbing his head or letting out a soft, knowing whistle. One day, a visiting journalist, intrigued by the Graceland parrot rumors, specifically asked to see King Tut. Elvis, usually wary of press, agreed, feeling a strange sense of pride. "So this is the famous parrot," the journalist remarked, looking at the magnificent bluebird. "I hear he has quite the vocabulary." Just then King Tut, as if on cue, boomed, "The King I's back." The journalist jumped, then laughed. "My goodness, he really does sound just like you, Mr. Presley." Elvis smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "He's a good boy," he said, offering King Tut a piece of apple. "He just likes to let everyone know when I'm around. Or even when I'm not. Sometimes," he winked. The journalist, sensing a story beyond the novelty, asked, "What's it like having your own voice echo through your home?" Seemingly at random, Elvis paused, looking at King Tut. "Back to basics, back to family, back to what feels real after being out there in the world." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the mansion, the grounds, the very essence of his home. "For the fans, the king is back means the music, the excitement. For me, it means coming home to my loved ones, King Tut. He just reminds us all of that in his own special way." The journalist scribbled notes furiously. This was a deeper insight than she had expected from a story about a talking parrot. As the years passed, King Tut remained a fixture at Graceland. His vibrant blue feathers might have dulled slightly with time, but his voice remained strong and clear. Priscilla would often find herself smiling when she heard the familiar phrase, thinking of the quiet, loving man behind the famous title. Lisa Marie, now a bit older, would affectionately call out, "Hi, Tut," whenever she heard him, sometimes even mimicking his phrase, much to Elvis's delight. Even when Elvis was away on tour, "The king is back." Announcements continued, a constant presence in the otherwise quieter Graceland. It was a comforting sound for Vernon, a reminder that his son's spirit, his very essence, permeated the home, even when he was thousands of miles away. It was a promise that no matter where he went, Elvis would always return. One day, long after the initial chaos had subsided and the parrot had become a beloved member of the Graceland family, Elvis was sitting on the stairs just below King Tut's cage. He was older now, a little wiser, but his eyes still held that youthful sparkle. He listened as King Tut, out of the blue, let out a soft, almost tender, "The king is back." Elvis smiled. A gentle, knowing smile. He reached out a finger and gently stroked King Tut's soft feathers through the bars of the cage. "Yeah, boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The story of Elvis and his talking parrot, King Tut, became a cherished legend within Graceland. It was a tale of a whimsical idea that caused unintended chaos, but ultimately led to a heartwarming realization. It showed that even the king of rock and roll, with all his fame and fortune, found his truest kingdom within the walls of his home, surrounded by love, and announced by the unforgettable booming voice of a blue macaw. King truly was back every single day in the quiet heart of Graceland.